I'm going to talk about changing volume or amplitude in files here on Audition. And if you want to follow along, you can go get these two files. Just go get the Gettysburg unedited WAV file inside the Working Files Narrations folder. There it is. And get the instrumental mix inside Working Files Music. Just Too Hard to Find subfolder, and there's the instrumental mix right there. We're going to start with the Gettysburg unedited file, and we're going to work only in the waveform view of the editor panel. We're not going to work on the multi-track session because that's a whole different topic that I save for some later tutorials. And we're not going to work in the spectral frequency display or the spectral pitch display because you don't really see volume changes there all that clearly. I'll show you what I mean. Here we are on the spectral frequency display. If I change the volume here by raising this guy, we're going to make things brighter. Yes, you can see there's a volume change now because they're brighter, but you really can't see how much you've changed the volume. It just shows that the volume has been increased there. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Control or Command Z. There we go. I'm going to switch back to the waveform view. Here, volume changes are much more obvious because you can see the peaks of these waveforms. And the higher the peaks or the deeper the peaks, the louder it is, the smaller the peaks, the quieter it is. This is that Gettysburg file we've been working with, the Gettysburg address.
407.
And I purposely recorded it kind of a low volume so we could mess with it here inside this tutorial. You can raise the volume of an entire file quite simply by just dragging or changing the volume control knob on this Adjust Amplitude bug here. This little guy that you can drag around the screen here. Now, if you don't see this, it's because you've changed preferences. Let me show you where that is. Edit or Adobe Audition Preferences. If you're on a Mac, go to General. And this is this little checkbox here, Show Heads-Up Display for Selection Ranges Only. I have that unchecked, which is the way it is by default, and that's the way I like it. If you have it checked, just uncheck it now so you can follow along. So this guy is always there. If it appears when you make a selection, that's because you got that checked. Okay, let's just raise the volume of the whole file. Very simple. I drag this guy right to raise it, left to lower it, or up or down. I don't want to raise it too high. There's this basic rule of thumb. If you start pushing the volume level up to the top here, up to the 0 dBFS, 0 decibels below full scale or relative to full scale, you're going to start getting distortion, and the distortion will get pretty obvious in just a moment. But let me just show you what the volume change does here. There's only one little spot that bumps into that 0 dBFS line, so we're probably okay. And if you have volume levels sort of hovering around -3, then you're really going to be safe. It should sound fine. Let's hear that volume change now.
407 years ago.
Yeah, it's much more upfront there, much more the way you'd expect to hear a speech like that. So you change the volume overall. I'm going to do Control or Command Z to undo that. Let's change the volume to too much. Let's get it way up there and really see if we can distort it. We'll notice we stop at 15. That's the limit that you can raise it the first time you try it. Then you keep on going past that. Let's hear what it sounds like now, right at this passage here. Now this is going to be loud, so if you got a headset on, you might want to maybe pull your headset away for just a second. It should sound rough and gravelly at the edges.
Now we are engaged in a great...
See, that's really horrible, right? That's because we're doing what's called clipping. The waveforms here are no longer rounded at the top or at the bottom. They're actually clipped off. They're flat, and that flat line there creates that horrible distorted clipping sound, which happens if you make the volume too high. So I'm going to go Control or Command Z to undo that and get rid of that, and do Control or Command Z to get rid of the original volume change. And click anywhere here to deselect the entire file. Now we're back to here. You can also change the volume on a segment. So we'll go from here to there, and I can change the volume of that segment, just like so. So that one will be louder than everything else.
Position that all men
versus this.
In a great...
It's quite easy to change the volume of part of a file or all of a file. Let's change over to the instrumental music mix here. This will be a little different because I want to show you a couple other features here. Something called fade in and fade out. But we'll first talk about the overall volume level. Just as before, you can raise this up or down. And here we get right to the 0 dBFS line, and that should sound okay. But again, if we raise it beyond 0 dBFS, start crunching it up against that line, we're going to clip the audio. So get ready, pull your headsets away for a second. Hear that kind of sound along the edges there? That's because the audio has been clipped there. So you always got to be careful about not pushing it past the 0 dBFS line. A couple of the things to note here are called the fade in and fade out. Here's the little fade in device. and the fade out. That lets you fade in or fade out the music at the beginning or the end of your piece. I'm going to zoom in here at the very beginning so I can sort of see this a little better. So I want to do a fade in here. So I'm going to drag this guy to the half-second mark. And notice that it's an S curve. You see that little S? That's because I set the cosine fade in as the default fade in. The cosine has this little S fade in. I press the home key to put the current time indicator at the beginning. And press play. You'll hear it kind of gradually fade in pretty quickly in a half-second. And it's kind of a comfortable fade in. I like that fade in. But if you choose to not use the cosine as your default, you can use the linear logarithmic one as your default. But even if you use the cosine as your default, you can opt for the linear or the logarithmic by just holding down the control key in Windows or the command key in Mac as you drag this, and it'll switch to the linear or logarithmic depending on how far you pull up or down on this cursor. So if I pull it up like this, then notice the curve. The curve is going to increase volume quickly and then finish it off gradually. So I'll pull this thing over a ways here so you can see that happen. I'll go to the home key. See how it just came up boom, really quickly like that? And if I use this guy and hold it down like this and press down my control key here, I'll drag it down now. It'll be a gradual increase and then a sudden increase at the end. I'll go to the beginning again. So it's a very gradual, then boom, it finishes off quite quickly at the end. Okay? What happens if you raise the volume of a selection when you've got music that's continuous like this? How will that affect the way it sounds? I'm going to zoom out all the way so you can see everything. I'll make a selection like that. If I increase the volume there, something like that, I'm going to press the M key to make a marker, and I'm going to change the volume of the adjacent clip here just by dragging it left like that and bring that way down and see how that sounds right there at that boundary. Very abrupt. And so making volume changes where you've got something that's continuous, where it's a flow, doesn't really work that well when you've got selections like this, but all is not lost. There's another way to deal with this, and I explained that in more detail when I cover effects. One other thing, here in the stereo file, you can work with just one channel at a time, and I have my context-sensitive channel editor switched on here inside my preferences. Just a reminder, you go to Edit or Adobe Audition, Preferences, under General, and we have the Allow Context-Sensitive Channel Editing, which I like to have. That's not on by default, so I've got that on now, which means when I hover my cursor toward the top of the stereo file, turn that little L comes on. If I just click, it'll select the left channel. Down here on the right, if I click that, it'll select the right channel. And I can change the volume there separately, work on those channels individually if I choose to do that. And again, I can make selections within them. If I hover down here and just make the selection here in the right channel, I can change the volume of just the right channel and just that segment of the right channel. So there you have it. That's how you adjust amplitude or volume inside files here in Audition.